All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Andy Conlin, and I am the outreach specialist with the COMET team. Today, we are so excited to be demoing the new COMET-Farm interface for the first time. I do want to clarify, this is not a formal training in the sense that typically with a COMET-Farm training, I first present a PowerPoint that goes through kind of the background on the tool. It talks about Comet Planner as well as COMET-Farm, the methods behind the tool. So it just has a little bit more context. Because so many folks have been waiting for the launch of this new interface, this week I wanted to dedicate just to demoing the tool and how to kind of go through it. And then next week, we're going to revert back to our typical trainings with that kind of background information. So when it comes to questions today, I'm hoping that they're more just about the interface itself and any confusion around that, rather than kind of traditional contextual questions for the tool. Also, the plan for today is I'm going to demonstrate a multi-accounting project that will consist of cropland, animal ag, and agroforestry accounting activities. It's a lot of information to take in. So what I'm going to do is after each of those modules, I'm going to open it up for 5 to 10 minutes for questions about that module. So rather than asking questions kind of throughout the presentation, I'd prefer you wait until the end of a module to ask those. If something is particularly pressing, you can drop it in the chat, but I can't promise that I'll get to it until that kind of end of the module section. Great. So we have a lot to cover, so I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. This is the new COMET-Farm interface. So this is what you'll see when you go to cometfarm.com and you have not logged in yet. So for users who already have an account, you'll see the kind of big button to log in. For anyone new to COMET-Farm who has not created an account, you have the option to register for an account. And one thing to note here is any user who wants to use a demo project without having to sign in, that option is going to be at the bottom here. So if you're just interested in kind of like tinkering around with the tool without it being linked to your account, you're welcome to use the demo projects there. However, as we always have, we highly encourage users to create an account and log in so that any changes you make to your projects will be saved to your account. Because as users of COMET-Farm are aware, there is a pretty high level of time investment and data entry, and so we would just hate for you to lose that by not being in your account. A couple other things to show on the homepage. We've kind of updated the front-facing information on display here. So here we have just kind of an overview of COMET-Farm, and soon we'll be linking the user guide here. The user guide is available. We just have forgotten to link it right here where it says COMET-Farm Manual. Methods and documentation. This is all in reference to the 2024 version of the USDA methods document that was released in April. That's what this whole GUI launch is related to, is that the previous version of COMET-Farm was based on a 2014 version of the methods document. And in April, we got a 2024 version. So we've been working behind the scenes to integrate those new methods and models from that, what we call the Blue Book. We have a little bit of a blurb on information safety. And then a new feature that we're excited about is this which COMET tool is right for me. These have a couple different flow charts to help users decide which tool they should use for their project. So between COMET-Farm or Comet Planner, depending on your location, and then whether you should use the COMET-Farm user interface or use the API. And again, for more information on each of these things, I would recommend attending the trainings that start next week. Speaking of those trainings, under resources, we have some helpful pieces of information here. Under documentation, we've linked that updated 2024 methods document that guided the whole tool. we have the Comet Tools user guide, or the COMET-Farm manual, as we like to call it. We are kind of iteratively updating it, but this is something we're really excited about. It has information about every module. You can learn about what your report means. You can look at other tools. So we highly recommend, before reaching out to us with any questions, most information that you need is going to be here in this manual. The training videos are going to be updated as we continue to roll out the new GUI. So as you can see, we're waiting on those soon. And then the Need Help widget was carried over from the old version of COMET-Farm. So we do still have frequently asked questions populated in this Need Help widget, and you still are able to contact us using that. Also, I mentioned the trainings that are going to pick up again next week. Those will, as they were before, be found on the training calendar, as well as today's demonstration, tomorrow's, and Thursdays as well, and our weekly office hours, which are intended for kind of project-specific questions. So if you're getting strange results and you want to meet with me to talk about them, that's kind of what the intention is for office hours. Okay, so that's a lot. I'm going to go ahead and sign in, and we'll get started on creating our project. So right when you sign into your account, you're going to be brought to your projects page, which is that tab up at the top here. This is going to have, for cropland, agroforestry, and forestry, your projects from your old COMET-Farm account are going to automatically be in your project repository. We sent out several announcements and tried to make it as publicly available as possible that animal ag projects were not going to be able to be transferred over because the methods behind the animal ag accounting activity changed so drastically from the old version to the new version that there just wasn't a way for our development team on the back end to transition those projects effectively. From here, within all of our projects, you're going to have options to edit your management, to duplicate your project, delete them, edit the title, stuff like that. But what I'm going to do today is just create a new project, which is at the bottom here. You do have the option to also explore demo projects, import your projects, and then lastly, this bulk action button is if you want to export or delete projects in bulk. So if I click bulk action, I can select numerous options here, and then those give me the options to export them or delete them. So like I said, I'm going to do a new project, and I'm going to call this Demo 1 for today, and tomorrow will be Demo 2. As I said, today we'll do a cropland, animal ag, and agroforestry project. Because I selected cropland, I am going to get this pop-up asking me to establish my baseline. For those who are familiar with COMET-Farm, your baseline refers to your kind of business as usual or your current management before you make a management change. One thing we're excited about that I'm sure a lot of our users are going to be excited about is that we no longer default your baseline to needing to start in the year 2000. Rather, we just have to have a minimum of 5 years of a baseline in order to assess your emissions. So from here, I can pick from anywhere from 2000 to 2018. 2018 is the latest I can select because, again, we do need 5 years of a baseline. I'm going to go ahead and arbitrarily select 2016. And I'll say, again, these options are going to be defaulted based on what the current year is. So I obviously can't pick anything later than 2023. And then because of that minimum 5-year baseline, I also can't pick anything prior to 2021. So that's why some of those options might not be available for you. From there, I'm going to go ahead and click Enter Management. This pop-up is going to come up, and this is just to help guide users in using the mapping page. I'm going to close out of that because I am going to demo it for you, so there's no reason. Okay, so the mapping page is pretty similar to the old version of COMET-Farm in that what I'm going to do is find my location first, and I'm going to enter my zip code, which is in Larimer County, Colorado, and navigate to my field. And then there are a couple different ways that you can define your field, and those are all up here on your toolbar. Some of you will be familiar with the option to draw a polygon, so that's to completely customize your field and make those boundaries as specific as you'd like. A new addition is this option to draw a rectangle. I love this feature because there are so many parcels that are a perfect rectangle, and so being able to just drag your cursor out makes life a lot easier. And I'm going to go ahead and call that Field 1 and save changes. Once you have defined a field, it's going to populate this table where it lists the title of your field, how many acres it is, and it will allow you to edit that field as well. This edit button only refers to the title of the field, I believe. Yes. Whereas if you actually want to modify the outline of it, that's another option in the toolbar. This one here, modify field. The other options, again, are the same as old COMET-Farm, where you have the option to draw a circle, draw a point, and when you draw a point, you'll be asked to enter the acreage of your field. You can delete fields in bulk if you need to. You can upload a shapefile. You can view your soil by a click, and you can export soil information. We also still have maintained our map view that allows you to view the soil map units that are present on your field. One of the reasons we made sure that was retained is that the number of soil map units included in your field dictates how many times the DACENT model is run for your project. So the bigger your field or the greater number of soil map units that you have included, the longer it's going to take for your report to generate, because COMET-Farm is running a model on every soil map unit included in your project. So I am going to just stick with my one field for the sake of time, as well as for our project or for our report to generate at the end. But we have also retained our kind of arbitrary cap of 50 fields at 1,100 acres each. Again, that is a arbitrary cap that has more to do with us trying to say too many soil map units are going to make it so your report is just not going to generate, more so than a specific cutoff on acres or field number. And that's why you see this 1 out of 50 is kind of for that delineation. From here, I'm going to say finish defining fields. One thing, did I click Croplands demo project instead of new project? That's something that I'll deal with later, but these pop-ups are supposed to be for a demo project. It's possible I clicked demo project by accident, but we're going to ignore those for now. Okay, so similar to old COMET-Farm, we do need to start with historic management. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to select your field, and whatever field you select up here during question 1 is going to relate to the following data entry. So for field 1, we're going to enter our historic management. And again, it's the same as it used to be in that you have a drop-down list of options, and we encourage users to just pick the option that they believe is most representative of their field. For users who aren't sure what their historic management is, try your best. We can also encourage you to reach out to your local conservation district or resource conservation district in order to see if they have information for you. Once you select your, so your historic management is first prior to 1980, and then from 1980 to the beginning of your baseline period. So in my case, 2016. So from 1980 to 2016, I'm saying I had irrigated annual crops in rotation. And then I'm also asked for, during that same period, what my tillage looks like. And I'm going to say it was intensively tilled. Now, for this project where I only have one field, I'm just going to press save. However, If I had more than one field that were in the same county, similar to Old Comet Farm, there would be a button right here that would allow me to copy my historic management from one field to another. That's only saving you about 4 or 5 clicks. So essentially this information that I just entered in this section could be copied over to another field if it's the same, which does save you a little bit of time if you have tons of fields all in the same area and they were all managed historically the same. Next, I'm going to scroll down, and this is where I'm going to be entering information for my baseline. So again, this is my business as usual before I make a change in my management. So I'm going to assume that my baseline is a corn soybean rotation that was intensively tilled. First, I'll walk you through an option for manually entering all your data. And then I'll go back and we'll look at this crop templates button, which was carried over from the drag and drop crop rotation feature, which was in the old interface. So as with Old Comet Farm, you do want to start with the first year in your baseline, so 2016. Only one crop is required for every year. And then you will have the option of including up to 3 crops per year. So from this drop-down menu, I'm going to select my crop. And once you make a crop selection, this window is automatically going to open. And this is where you have the option to enter your baseline management. And something that we think will help users keep track of what they're working on is this is my corn in 2016 for the first field in my project. So when I click on each of these kind of collapsible sections, it's how I can enter management. So for my planting date, similar to Old Comet Farm, I just want to make sure I choose as accurate of a planting date as I can, given however much information I have. So I'm going to say that my corn was planted at the beginning of May, again, of 2016. Automatically, Comet Farm is going to default to including a harvest date. This trash can icon here will allow you to remove that. In my case, I do want my corn to be harvested, we'll say in early October. Then I'm going to elect that my corn had a grain, fruit, seed, root, or tuber harvested. And then based on that, any additional dry matter removal could be entered here as a percentage. However, checking this box indicates already that a grain has been harvested, and this % dry matter removal is in addition to the grain. So I'm going to keep that at 0. Similar to Old Comet Farm, the yield that the user enters, and you can see it in kind of fine print here, is only going to affect your report if you also include a biomass burning event. Otherwise, Decent is going to simulate its own yield based on other parameters that you've entered. So I'll go ahead and enter a yield, an arbitrary one. Just know that this is not going to affect my report because I'm not going to include a burn event. Scrolling down, we are in our section on tillage system intensity and other field operations. One thing we are really excited about is we have entered the opportunity for users to use our tillage intensity calculator, which is super useful if you know how your field was tilled, but you're not sure how we would classify that tillage event. So even though you do have the option to manually select your tillage from these drop-down menus, and one thing you'll notice is we have these Roman numerals next to each tillage option. This question mark icon will help you determine what those Roman numerals mean. But for the sake of time today, I'm just going to use the tillage intensity calculator. So the way this works is it has the implements and then a column for pre-planting and a column for post-harvest. And so these tools are all from the Blue Book methods document. So that's where we got the options here. You select your tillage implements. I want to choose one that is probably intensive tillage. You can also choose more than one. So you'll see that as I make those selections, they are automatically populating down here with a pre-planting tillage intensity. And then post-harvest, I can make similar selections, and those will populate. Then, once I've made all the selections that I want to on this page, I can click Populate Intensity, and they will automatically be entered here. These options are just for traditional tillage operations. Any other field operations, such as mowing, herbicide events, will be included under Add Field Operations, where we have that drop down. We no longer are asking under tillage, we're no longer asking for the date of those tillage operations. Instead, they're just categorized, as you can see, by pre-planting or planting and post-harvest harvest. And that's because so many users were having tillage events during a crop's growing season that was killing the crop off incidentally in a way that they didn't intend to. However, you do still have the option to enter a traditional tillage operation here and selecting an operation date if that's your forte. So, tillage. Moving right along, we've got fertilizer applications. This blue box at the top adds up the nitrogen applied between fertilizer applications and organic amendments. We also think users will be excited about the option to add biochar amendments. This is not related to the total nitrogen applied up here, but it is considered an amendment. So that's why it's included in that section. And these function the same as they did in the old interface, where you enter the date that it was applied, the type, the amount applied, and the total N applied. The nice thing about these is that once you enter a value in one, it automatically populates the other. So you just need to either know the total amount applied or the total N applied, and COMET-Farm will default the other value for you. I'm not going to apply fertilizer right now for this demo. Irrigation also functions the same, where you can either opt to manually enter your irrigation dates with a start and end date and days between, or you can choose to auto irrigate, where you choose a start and end date and just enter the available water holding capacity. Then I'll delete that too. Grazing events also are functionally the same as our liming events. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and save. That was all of the information for the first year and my first crop. So at this point in 2016, all I have is my corn being planted and harvested and any management associated with that. I then can add crops 2 and 3 manually if I wanted to. We did carry over the same functionality from Decent, which is that more than one crop cannot be growing at a time. So when I go to add a second crop, and we'll see if this works correctly. The nice thing that we've done is we've added this text underneath your second and third crop operations. So now you can see, okay, my corn is already growing May to October. So when I select my planting date, it has to be outside that window. And even if I did try to do it during the same time, those dates are going to be grayed out. We're hoping that that will lead to a little bit less user confusion. We also have carried over the functionality of being able to copy management from one year to another, as well as from one field to another. So for my 2016 corn, let's say every other year in my baseline, I'm still going to be managing corn the same way. I can go over to this copy feature, and I can select every other year in my baseline. And if I had more than one field, they would also be populating this table underneath F1, and I could copy my corn to other fields as well as other years. And when I press save and copy, you'll see that my corn's management gets brought over to every other year, and it has all of the management still associated with it. So the intensive tillage is still there, the dates are the same, Everything else should be the same. I could then repeat this whole process starting in 2017 with soybean, and that would allow me to populate my whole baseline. But I do want to highlight this crop templates button, which again is a version of the drag and drop crop rotation feature that was on our old interface. This has just improved its accessibility. We had a little bit of issues with the accessibility of that drag and drop feature for people who didn't have clicking options, or so we wanted to make sure that users could tab through the crops here. However, it does function the same in that you can select a crop from a select list of crops. So I'm going to stick with my corn. You select yes or no, was it irrigated? And then the pre-planting tillage intensity. Then you can select your second crop in whatever order you'd like it to be. So this is going to populate your entire baseline with all of your crops. And so when I do corn and soybean, it's going to populate my whole baseline with alternating corn, soybean. So it's going to just follow whatever order you list these crops in. And I'll say that my soybean is reduced tillage. So if you wanted to make your rotation a little bit more complicated, you can also add a crop, you can remove a crop. And once you press save, it is going to overwrite anything that is already in your baseline. So when I press save, that corn that I added manually is going to be overwritten. The reason we have this feature is for users who don't really have management information about a field. So for example, they might know that it was a corn soybean rotation, but they have no idea how the field was managed. These crops included in this template include kind of typical management information. So typical planting and harvest dates, typical fertilizer application, stuff like that. So now my whole baseline is populated with corn and soybean. When I go into my management, my dates changed slightly because they were overwritten. My tillage that I selected got carried over. So again, I only selected a pre-planting intensive tillage. So that's the only thing that got brought over. And then I also said that it was irrigated. And so we've got irrigation information. So with that, when you are done entering information for your baseline, we're also excited about this option for users to review their inputs, because we found that with the amount of data that users need to enter and how specific it has to be, there are going to be user errors. You are going to select a date incorrectly or accidentally apply too much fertilizer, who knows. This review inputs allows you to see all of that information in one place, in one sitting. So it's got every irrigation application, every fertilizer application, every tillage is all in this table here. And you can even download it as a CSV file to review and just make sure if you're getting weird results, first make sure that you've entered your data correctly, and then reach out to us to see if there's an issue in the system. Now, when you click next, you're going to get two options. And that's because another update from old COMET-Farm is that a scenario is no longer required in order to run a report. It used to be required, and so we told users, oh, just make a copy of your baseline and then you can ignore it. Now it's become entirely optional. However, I think that one of the best values of COMET-Farm is the ability to compare and contrast management strategies. So if I were to change my management, how would my emissions change? So I am going to add a scenario, but I do have the option to just continue straight through to animal ag. I'm going to make this pretty quick for the sake of time. So there's this drop-down menu where you say create new scenario. Similar to old COMET-Farm, you have to name that scenario. So I'm going to say convert to no-till. Copy from existing scenario. Again, this is optional. You don't have to copy. However, if you're only changing one or two aspects of your management, I think it's worthwhile to copy your baseline and then make adjustments rather than start from scratch all over again. And then you press create new scenario, and it's going to populate this table with that scenario that you can then edit or delete or view. So that's what I'm working on. This little green check indicates that there is technically complete data because it is just a copy of my baseline at this point. From there, I'll select the field, and I only have one. And this page functions the same as the baseline page. So if I want to edit my management, it's the same. I can copy. Everything about it is the same, except it also has this conservation practice advisor feature. This is brought over from old COMET-Farm. Essentially, it's an automated way for you to apply a management strategy to your field without having to do it manually. So for the entirety of my field 1, meaning both corn and soybean, I'm selecting to convert to no tillage. That means both intensive and reduced tillage are going to be updated to no-till. And so when I press save and copy, it is going to automatically apply that. It will overwrite any previous tillage applications. So now when I go to a random corn in the middle, you can see all my other data is the same, so it's still planted and harvested at the same time. However, when I go to where I previously had an intensive tillage event, I now have a no-till event. So that is a favorite feature of mine, just for the shortcut of it all. And again, similar with the baseline, you do have the option to review your inputs as well. If you want to, again, you can create up to 10 scenarios, just like an old COMET-Farm. And again, that's just using the same drop-down menu. For the sake of time, I'm just going to stick with my one. So as I press continue to animal ag, I will open up the floor for a couple minutes. If anyone has questions, you can either unmute and ask your question, or you can drop it in the chat before I move on to animal ag. No questions is good, so I'm not mad. Great. Well, if you do think of any cropland questions to ask, do feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'll hopefully be able to circle back to it. But I'll just keep on pushing through. One thing I forgot to point out that we like and are excited about is this roadmap at the top, where it includes each of your accounting activities and kind of what step you're on. And it also indicates the completeness of that section. So right now you can see we have field location, field management, and scenario management are all pertaining to cropland. And those are filled in with blue because those are complete. We're moving on to animal agriculture, and it's not filled in it's white because it's not complete. And the little blue ring that you see around it indicates that that's where you are currently. It is interactive, so if I wanted to go back to my mapping page and click field location, it would bounce me back to that page. So that's a little bit of a shortcut rather than having to click back through everything or anything like that. So with animal ag, as usual, we are going to start with the location. Rather than a zip code, which we previously used, it's now by state and county. And again, that is for weather data associated with your project. I'm going to keep my project consistent and just have everything be in Larimer County, but you don't have to. That's just a choice that I'm making. And one thing with animal ag that is a little different, just slightly different from cropland, is that these save buttons are interspersed a little bit more consistently throughout. So if you're hitting a blocker of not being able to proceed to the next step, just as a rule of thumb for troubleshooting, always try going back and pressing save. because I think that often can resolve that issue. Next, we have, excuse me. Next, we have the option to select your animal categories. And so those are first put into overarching categories like cattle and poultry. And then when you click on them, you get your drop-down options. So I probably, again, for the sake of time, I'm only going to select one animal category. You'll notice that for our dairy cattle, we have this option to add up to 3 groups per animal category. The term groups used to be herds, but we determined that that was a little bit of a misleading terminology. So we switched to groups. However, they do still refer to groups of animals that are within the same category that are managed differently in terms of their feed or their housing or their manure, anything like that. So if I have 2 groups of dairy heifer replacements, but one is housed in pasture and another is in a covered barn, I would make 2 groups of those, and you can have up to 3. I guess for the sake of curiosity, I'll show you at least what that looks like down here. When you press save, those animal types, again with the demo project, those animal types are going to populate step 3, which is where you have the option to enter your management. So because I selected 2 dairy heifer replacement groups, there are 2 here as well, labeled 1 and 2. I can go back and adjust that. Just know that I might, if I've already started to enter management, you will get a warning saying, are you sure you want to adjust your animal categories when you've already entered management? Which I think is a fair warning to make sure people want to do that. You will notice throughout that there are check marks. Those indicate completeness of that stage. So this is grayed out because we have not completed data entry for this animal category. So I'm going to go ahead and say edit management. Again, these sections are broken down into kind of collapsible sections. And we are on our baseline, and we're on our first animal type, which is a dairy heifer replacement. When I expand animal details, similar to the old version, we've got our population across months, and you can use these arrows to copy that data across as a shortcut. You can keep zeros if you didn't have any animals during a period of time. And then the live body weight across those months as well. I'm keeping it as generic as possible for the sake of time. And again, making sure you press save after each of these steps. And you'll notice that check mark just became green because I finished that. Next, we have our feed characteristics. For users who know information like their DMI, crude protein, fat, and ash, you do have the option to manually enter that data across months. So again, scrolling down, you have January through December. You can copy information across months. But you'll see up here, if you don't know the required feed characteristics, you can use our feed calculator. This feed calculator, we tried really hard to improve from the last version because some of us found that version a little bit confusing. The first step is to always make sure that first you're selecting the months that you're applying a certain feed type to. So in my case, let's say I wanted to apply a certain feed to April through July. First, I select those months, and then I can go through each of these feed types and enter the feed intake as fresh weight. This is just a carousel of all the feed types. It can be a little overwhelming. So we do have these pills that they're sorting pills. So if you want to look just at dry forage, you can do that, and that makes it a little bit less of an overwhelming thing. We do also have a search function where you can enter corn. And because I selected dry forage and corn, these are the options available to me. And then I think you can just erase that to get it back. I am just, again, for the sake of time, going to just say all year round, they are getting alfalfa and sorghum. These are arbitrary choices. Don't make fun of things I'm entering. Okay, so the feed calculator is really nice because then once I made those selections, I went a little fast, but I clicked the yellow button that said populate feed. And now you can see all of those feed characteristic values are populated for me, and I didn't have to enter them manually. So that's a really nice shortcut. Now I'm going to collapse that one because it's complete, as indicated by the green check, and move on to housing. What they're asking for here is the percent of time spent in each type of housing for each month. So each column has to add up to 100, and you'll get the error message at the bottom if they don't. So I'm going to say that my cattle spent 50% of their time in a covered compost barn and 50% of their time on pasture. And I'm copying those across months to make sure that I'm consistent, and you'll see at the bottom, all of those add up to 100. The selections that you make on this page are going to dictate the questions that you're asked later on. So during this demo, you're not going to see every question that you might be asked. Instead, you'll only see questions that pertain to my covered compost barn and my pasture range. I press save, and now I can move on to manure. We have updated our manure and housing kind of tracking to be, we think, a little bit of a better flow. So essentially, if you have animals all in the same housing and their manure is all going to the same place, we're hoping that we've made that more of a feasible option than the old version of the GUI. So for right now, first it's going to ask, is an anaerobic digester used as the primary manure treatment option, yes or no? If the answer is no, I'll be asked questions about my covered composting barn. If the answer is yes, then I'm asked questions about my anaerobic digester. So I'm going to say no because I think this is a little more indicative of what users will see and just a little bit more data entry. So when I expand my first animal type, and again, that's because I selected covered composting barn, pasture range doesn't have follow-up questions for manure treatment. However, some of the other ones do, so you would see a couple more of these housing categories for other situations. So next, you're just asked, do you use a solid liquid separator? I'm going to say yes. What is your separator type? Percent of solids removed defaults to 25. I'm just going to keep it at that. Now, this table, we want to make sure folks don't get confused about. We tried to make it as clear as possible, but because we are separating our solids and liquids, the first question is, out of all your solids, what is the manure system for those solids? So the percent of total solids entering the system, so this second column here, still needs to add up to 100, even though 25% of the solids were removed. If that makes sense. It hurts my brain sometimes to think about. So in my case, for example, I am just going to say that we had 100% of our solids in solid storage as a stockpile. And then when we scroll down, we have this exact same table, not exact same table, but it functions the same only for liquids. So how were your liquids entering the system, or how are they being treated? And so I'll say we had a storage tank uncovered with a crust as my answer. And again, if they don't add up to 100, you're not going to be allowed to proceed. So keep an eye on that total sum at the bottom for you to save yourself some grief. Okay, I've pressed save. If I scroll up, all of these are green checks. So when I press close, now this is a green check, meaning management entry for my dairy heifer replacements is complete. And because of the manure selections that I made previously, I have a couple different manure follow-up questions. If you don't see this section, manure follow-up questions, that's not an issue. It just means that the selections that you made do not require additional information. So if your experience in animal ag is not identical to this one, that is not inherently a red flag. It just means that your management is different. And so you're being asked different questions. So you'll remember I had my solids being stored in a storage tank. So it's going to ask about the length of that storage. And then I also said that my liquids were in an uncovered storage tank with a crust. So it's going to ask me for my square feet of that storage tank. And when I press save, that completes animal ag entry for my baseline. Adding a scenario is once again optional. I'll see if we can add parentheses optional here to avoid confusion. So I am going to do that again for the sake of being thorough in my demonstration. Again, you can either continue to a scenario without copying your baseline and enter everything from scratch, or in my opinion, you can save a little bit of time, assuming the majority of your management is the same, and choose to copy your baseline. I'm going to say that I installed an anaerobic digester as my scenario. So now, again, with the demo project pop-ups, because I just copied my baseline, it's going to assume that all of my management is already complete, but I do want to just pop into my management. Sometimes it takes a minute to recognize that all of those are complete. And now under my manure, I'm going to say yes, an anaerobic digester was used as my primary treatment option, and just answer the follow-up questions. Click save. And you'll notice now I do not have any manure follow-up questions because everything is now in an anaerobic digester. Plain and simple. Okay, with that, I'm going to continue to agroforestry, but as previously, I will pause in case anyone has animal ag questions. Okay, great. So agroforestry will go by very quickly, and then we can spend the rest of our time hopefully on the report. So again, I am in Larimer County, Colorado, and truly agroforestry, kind of the methods behind the scene have changed. So your reported values between the two interfaces will be slightly different. But in terms of what information you are asked to enter, it really hasn't changed very much. So you still have the option to either use a predefined scenario or enter your own information. This is now in a little fun tabular format. I'm going to just do a predefined scenario. The drop-down menus will vary based on where your operation is located. For the predefined scenario, just ask for the age and size, and then when you click add scenario, it's going to populate this little table below. If I went to enter my own information, similarly, I would add species and they would populate this table at the bottom. So with that, I'll go ahead and continue to the report. And one thing to notice, you'll see all of these are filled in blue now because they're all complete. Okay. Ignore that. Similar to old COMET-Farm, you remember that you sometimes have to wait a little bit for your cropland project to be generated. This report looks a lot different, but it does function very much the same. So there still are tabs at the top that allow you to look at the different accounting activities. So while I'm waiting for my cropland reports to generate, I'm going to pop over to Animal Ag. And here, this tab that says dairy heifer replacements, if I had more than one type of animal included in my project, so if I had dairy heifer replacements and dairy dry cows, there would be tabs similar to these where you can select which one you want to view at a time. Then the default for your report is to only display your baseline emissions. And again, this is for 85 dairy heifer replacements. If I want to compare my baseline and my scenario, which I do, you click on View Scenarios, and I'm going to add my anaerobic digester to be viewed. All of your scenarios will be displayed here. So the reason we added this function is sometimes you want to just be able to look at your baseline right next to one of your scenarios rather than have your table be really long showing all of your scenarios. So when you click that, this report will function the same in that you have your emissions, and these are average annual metric tons of CO2 equivalent over 1 year. And then you have your change column, which is that change in emissions based on the change in management. So this also defaults to being totally expanded, but these can be not expanded. And so the basics that you see are that by installing a anaerobic digester and changing that manure management system, I've reduced my emissions by 19.9 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. Of course, most people do want to see their source and subsource categories. So you can see we've also got it by group. I only have one group of dairy heifer replacements, but if I had more than one, that's where you'd see those. You have your methane emissions by housing and manure, and then your nitrous oxide emissions by housing and manure. If you had multiple animals, you get your total at the very bottom. And one thing that we did want to make sure we included is rather than have to separately seek out your graphical report, we here where it says report display, it's defaulted to be on dual, which means that your graphical is going to just appear at the very bottom of your tabular. And then you can also elect to just view your graphical report. You can also undo this clicking and make it so that you're only seeing your baseline, but that's essentially how it functions there. And then the buttons at the bottom are the same across each of your accounting activities. You have the option to export your project, which is going to send a .cmt file, so we call that our COMET file, either to an email address, the email address associated with your account, or you can download it locally to your computer. The .cmt files can then be re-imported into COMET-Farm, but they can also be viewed using an XML reader. So that's an option there. You can download your report, which will download a zipped file that includes Excel spreadsheets of both the reported values, a detailed report, and your graphical report. We have an interpret your report button that provides an infographic for what your values mean, and then our greenhouse gas equivalencies calculator. And those are going to be the same across each of these. Let's check back in on our cropland project. Cool, it generated, great. So again, remember that right now, the values that you're seeing here in red are indicating what your baseline emissions were for projected 10 years past the end of your baseline. So my baseline ended in 2023. So the values that you see here are the average annual metric tons of CO2 equivalent over a 10-year period past the baseline. So we made sure to make that a little bit more clearer to our users. And then if I wanted to view my scenario, which is converting to no tillage, again, it has that same 10-year time period. So this is assuming my change in management was projected 10 years into the future. it looks like I'm reducing my emissions by about 6.9 metric tons of CO2e. We changed the colors from red and I think green to red and blue in order to address colorblind accessibility. So blue values now indicate a reduction in emissions or an increase in sequestration. And similar to what we saw with the animal ag, these are collapsed by field first, then by source category. So we've got carbon, CO2, nitrous oxide, and methane. And then those are broken down even farther by soil carbon. There's a biochar option on here, et cetera, et cetera. Everything else at the bottom is the same. So again, we've got our graphical report. We've got those same buttons available. The only things different here are a couple different display options. So you can look at your emissions per acre if you want to. All that is doing is taking the emissions presented and dividing them by the number of acres. So nothing complicated. And then you also have the option to view uncertainty. I'm not sure if this pop-up is going to happen. Oh, it is. I've read the above text. So that uncertainty can be viewed as well. And then you can also toggle to view that uncertainty as a percent as well, as a percent, I mean. Yeah, and then we have your available water holding capacity report by field is also available. So everything pretty much from the old version was carried over to the new version and just tried to make a little bit more seamless. Lastly, we'll peek at agroforestry. Again, this report really did not change much at all. There aren't scenarios, like there's not a compare and contrast. So you'll notice that we don't have that option to view a scenario because agroforestry is about demonstrating the carbon sequestered in 10-year increments across time, assuming a practice. So my 4-row windbreak sequesters an average yearly amount of carbon of 14.2. So this really didn't change very much at all. Cool. With that, we have a good amount of time at the end for any questions. I'm happy to hop back to answer more specific questions. So yeah, I'll open up the floor. Again, you're welcome to either use the chat or unmute. I'll stop the recording though so that we have no privacy concerns.